He stopped off to watch the young doe grazing with her 2 yearling fawns, but when the deer became spooked and ran off, he looked up and noticed that it was watching him. But before we begin, if you love cryptids and want to learn the full story, both the legends and the facts delivered as a narrative story, then this guided tour is for you. Howl on over and tap that subscribe, like, or review button, depending on where you watch or listen. Now, grab your leash and get ready. The tour is about to start. I'm Cody, and you're touring cryptids across the Atlas. The night was dark, mysterious, and boring, just like every other night on Border Patrol. But things wouldn't stay that way for long. Early that September morning, a security forces airman at the local Air Force Base in St. Louis County, Minnesota, was tending to his nightly rounds, ensuring the perimeter of the Air Force Base was secure. The night shift was operating on less than a skeleton crew, with so few people on duty that it often meant splitting up tasks to make all the evening rounds. But no matter, nights were mostly quiet. Why would this night be any different? But as the airman pulled along the northeast edge of the base, he began to feel a bit uneasy. Maybe it was the acres upon acres of woods that lay just beyond the fence line. The base might have been just a few miles north of Duluth, a reasonably sized city, but in Minnesota, things get rural pretty quick. Or maybe it was the fact that he was alone tonight. Driving these border roads was normally a bit less freaky when there was an extra set of eyes to help keep watch. But it just so happened that there were an extra set of eyes after all. But these eyes were not looking out, but rather looking back. The first-hand account reads, I was on the road driving towards our baseball field when my headlights caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me. They were almost eye level with me, and I was sitting in a Ford F-150. Around this time, a few of the guys had been seeing this huge buck around the property, like a 16-pointer or something around that size. I was about 80 yards or so when I saw these eyes reflecting back at me, so I'm thinking it was a big deer. I gotta see this thing. So I hit the gas and started speeding towards the field. This is where it all happened so fast. It's almost hard to explain. There was a little slope behind the baseball field. It sloped down probably about 12 or 15 feet into a brush line. The brush went back about 30 feet, then turned into a thick tree line. The brush was probably armpit high to me and pretty tough to traverse through, being so thick and all. As I turned into the baseball field and turned the truck towards the thing, I just caught the rear end of it as it was leaping down the slope, below the line of sight of my headlights. The thing was no more than about 20 feet ahead of me when it leaped. All I got to look at was the back end of this thing, and it was big. The best I can do to describe it is to say that it was wolf-dog-like in nature. It had a long tail, longer than 2 feet. The hind legs looked exactly like those of a dog. Same with the back paws, but the paws were huge. They were bigger than my hands for sure. The hair and fur was wavy yet matted and thick. The color was blondish or very light brown. I didn't notice any gray in it, but this all happened within about 2 to 3 seconds. I sat in my patrol truck for a couple of seconds, confused and thinking, I know what I saw, but it couldn't have been what I saw. So I hopped out with my flashlight and M16 rifle and walked to the edge of the slope. All I heard was the thing running through the woods in front of me, heading in a northwest direction. And this thing sounded like a moose charging through those trees. It made a lot of noise. That's when I started to get really scared, thinking, if this is some sort of wolf or whatever it might be, my M16 isn't going to do a thing to this animal. So I jumped back into my patrol truck and as fast as I could, headed back to headquarters. Now, I'm a trained observer, an avid hunter, and have worked with animal rehabilitation with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in the past. I know my animals and the Northwoods extremely well. I saw exactly what I saw, and that was the back end of a large wolf dog-like thing that basically had its eyes level with mine while I was in a patrol truck. When When you think of Minnesota cryptids, werewolf-like creatures might not be what come to mind. But throughout the late 90s and into the mid-2000s, dogmen seemed to find their way into the land of 10,000 lakes. Maybe the beast of Bray Road that famously terrorized Elkhorn, Wisconsin in the 1930s needed a vacation. Or maybe there are more of these things than one might realize. But before we explore another eyewitness account, we first need to figure out what even is a dogman, and how did werewolf-like cryptids, or the folklore of them, find their way into North America? See, werewolf history runs deep. Some claim it can be traced back all the way to the Mesopotamian text, the Epic of Gilgamesh, written around 2100 BC. In this tale, Gilgamesh called off a romance upon finding out that the woman who had caught his eye turned her last mate into a wolf. Again, in Greek mythology, we see the idea of canine transformations. The legend tells of how Lycaon, the son of Pelasgus, angered Zeus when he served the god the remains of a sacrificed child. Taken with anger, Zeus turned Lycaon and his sons into wolves. There's even a tale in the Saga of the Volsungs, a Nordic folkloric work, that depicts how a father and son discovered wolf pelts that, when worn, would transform them into wolves for the next 10 days. And it probably goes without saying, but many of these tales picked up through time found their way across Europe, from France and Germany into England and ultimately the United States and North America. These werewolf tales morphed over time from a more human-wolf hybrid kind of creature into something more cryptid and beast-like. Now, I just skimmed over a ton of history that is, well, wild and fascinating, but rest assured, we will dive into all of that cryptid goodness in my next episode. But for sake of time today, I wanted to provide you with a very broad overview to how these cryptid tales found their way from ancient texts to North America. And now, to offer a counterpoint, we have the Native Americans' belief of men who can transform into beastly creatures as well. Ever heard of skinwalkers? The Navajo people have passed down stories of healers who became corrupted by their own power, transforming them into dark beasts, most notably that take the form of a coyote-like dogman creature. We also have the Wendigo, that monstrous humanoid that originated amongst the Algonquian-speaking First Nations. When European settlers first heard of this creature, their werewolf tales quickly began to merge based on the similarities in these stories. So maybe people have been trying to label this phenomena for aeons. Maybe humans transforming into canines is a curse from above, a gift from below, or even a natural phenomena from humans' often insatiable desire for power. Heck, there's even real psychological disorders based on these exact accounts in the DSM-5. Ever heard of clinical lycanthropy? Or maybe it's a collection of folklore that has been built layer upon layer. Or maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Obviously, there are tons more here to cover, and rest assured, we're going to touch on each of these points in the coming weeks. But for now, if you'll stick around, I have one more first-hand Minnesota Dogman encounter I'm sure you'll love to hear. It was a routine drive through the Minnesota snow, or at least it started as such. In the first couple of months in 2009, a man was driving those rural backroads when a few deer caught his eye, but they caught something else's eyes too. His first-hand account reads, "I live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is in west central Minnesota, about an hour's drive from Fargo, North Dakota. My mother-in-law lives out in the country, about 3 or 4 miles out of Fergus Falls, and I was staying there while my wife and her mother went shopping in town. They called me and asked if I wanted to go to a 7 p.m. movie, so I left the house at about 6:30, 6:45 p.m. to meet them at the theater, about 2 miles from their house, on a country road known as the Wendell Road, along the Mustinka River. I saw 3 white-tailed deer. 2 of the deer were rather small, probably just yearlings, and a larger doe who I assumed was their mother. Me being an avid hunter, lover of wildlife, and future wildlife biologist, stopped to look at these deer. I should also mention that I hunt in the area and have spent my whole life in the Fergus Falls area. The deer were following a small creek bed, which is in fact the Mustinka River. So there were hardly any trees except for one. Now maybe I didn't see it there because of the tree, but I just noticed something crouching behind the tree on my side of the road, looking at the deer and, to my disbelief, hunting them. It just sat there, looking at the deer, taking no notice of me, even though I was in my truck no more than 40 yards away, with a clear view with nothing obstructing my view of it. It had one hand on the tree that it was bracing itself with. What struck me as shocking, though, was the fact that it seemed to be a two-legged creature and not a four-legged one. Its hands appeared to have opposable thumbs and were rather slender and long, very unlike that of a wolf. The creature looked as though, if it stood upright, it would be over 7 feet tall, with a protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, slender waist, thick, muscular thighs, and being as there was snow on the ground, I couldn't see the feet. He was deep dark brown in color throughout the body. After several seconds of looking at the creature in shock, the deer ran off. Then, something amazing happened. It looked right at me, as though blaming me for losing its meal. He just sat there, looking at me and blinking, but not moving. This scared the crap out of me, so I hit the gas pedal and drove off. It was very dark after the movie, so I didn't much feel like trudging through the 3.5 feet of snow, with the possibility of a monster lurking in the area who is currently looking for a meal that I scared off. So at about 10 a.m. the next morning, I went back there and walked down to that tree. Under the tree, there was no snow, so there were no tracks that I could see. But leading up to the tree, there were 3 tracks leading in from my grandmother-in-law's field, which was hard black dirt. And if you know what Minnesota field dirt looks like in the winter and early spring, you can't make anything out of the dirt. And while the tracks I did find were only about 6 to 7 inches in length, they were clearly canine footprints, with the exception of 4 toe-looking marks in the snow that resembled those of a human's. If you love cryptids and want to learn even more about the creatures we just talked about, find us on TikTok or Instagram. Just search username @TheCryptidAtlas. By the way, the episode you just witnessed is both a podcast and YouTube video, so whichever format you prefer, we have you covered. Also, check out our interactive cryptid map to browse the globe and learn about cryptids from your favorite areas. Every single episode we make adds another pin to our map. You can find our social channels, the map, and more at thecryptidatlas.com. And when you find us, be sure to tap that follow button and get in on the action by dropping a comment on our recent videos. If you enjoy this show, consider sharing it on with a friend. And if you listen on Apple or Spotify, consider leaving an honest review to help other listeners know what to expect. Thanks for touring cryptids across the Atlas. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see just on the edge of the road.